faces its greatest challenge yet, with shrinking economies and frightening levels of unemployment.
What has become of the European dream of prosperity, democracy and human rights 5 years into a grinding crisis?
Currently no mechanism for channeling political leadership.
Empire takes a journey through the continent to ask the big questions. Is France in decline? Is the continent following in Germany's footsteps?
We've come to Paris looking for answers.
We're making the German and English Europe, not the French Europe.
And we're in the Czech Republic to find out if the dream of the European Union lives on in Eastern Europe.
We are not only competing within Europe, we are global.
As the German-driven, EU-imposed austerity measures hurt millions,
We're here in Athens to find out who's to blame.
They are imposing and blackmailing politics.
with economic power comes political responsibility.
This is what the Germans don't deliver.
In the absence of political leadership, will Berlin dictate the future of the continent? Or will Germany become truly European?
Germany's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't.
I am Marwan Bishara, and this is Empire.
Offen für Gespräche natürlich.
The European Union, a dream, born of the ashes.
The nation-state and aggressive nationalism had been discredited. After the Second World War, there was a window of opportunity.
A dream of a united Europe, to end the killing, to bring peace and prosperity. The United States wanted a united Europe, to keep the Soviets out.
After it was clear that the Soviet troops wouldn't retreat, the priority was to build up Europe in a way that it would help the Americans to withstand Soviet expansionism.
While the Europeans wanted a mega entity that could compete with the United States. The political necessity was to bring the two key players and historical antagonists, France and Germany, together. First, to build a bridge.
There was a remarkable moment, certainly on the part of the French, to say, look, we've gone through these two horrible experiences, we need to try something new.
The weapon in the war for peace would be money.
This cooperation, first on the functional level, but always with a political ideology in the background that we are moving towards ever closer union. So we're starting small by pooling our coal and steel resources that were resources for war, but then we go step by step in the areas where cooperation makes sense towards a much more ambitious political project of ever closer union.
Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements, which first create a de facto solidarity.
An impossible dream in the place where nationalism itself had been born, which had known constant war for centuries. Yet, an amazing thing happened. It worked.
Europe has always been complicated. It's always been diverse. The real miracle has been how cohesive it has been under the European Union.
We traveled Europe to Paris, to Prague, to Berlin, to Athens, to Brussels, to discover what this new international creation has meant to the people within it and who are living through its birth pangs.
It ended up into two categories. One, small, ruling, monopoly, big money, banks, sheep owners class, which is less than 5% of the European population, and then 95% of working people. That means anybody, from the garbage man to the doctor, from the teacher to the mother, that they are losing everything Europe built it up with wars, blood, revolutions, and ideas.
And what it means in terms of empire, a major player between America and the emerging power of Asia. The two essential players in the European Union have very different visions of society and the role of the state. At the moment, it appears that France is declining and Germany is rising. If that's true, is it reversible? What does it mean for the future of Europe? To discuss all of this and more, we dropped by the offices of Le Monde Diplomatique in Paris.
Well, welcome to Empire. Let's start with the idea of the decline of France. Is France in decline? Is it permanent? Is it cyclical? Why is France in trouble?
Now it seems to me that the idea that France is in decline is a notion that some elites put on the stage to oblige the people of Europe, the people of France, but also the people of Europe, to give up some of their social benefits, saying that we can't afford them any longer.
France was a kind of model, as Serge said, for not only for other Western countries, United States, but even for the third world. The idea that public spending is important, education is important, health is important. It's better to be unemployed in France than to work in the United States in some work. So what is the aim? I mean, it's not, when we say there is 12% of unemployment, it is a problem. But what do we want? The French worker to be paid like the Chinese workers?
In a sense, the argument of the crisis, of the decline, the shock treatment, as Naomi Klein would say, is something one can use when one wants to redirect the course of a nation, saying you can't go on.
But
like
factually, it is in stagnation?
Well, factually...
Unemployment is 12%?
Yes.
The debt is 90% of the economy? It is in trouble.
Yes, it is in trouble, largely because it followed neoliberal economic policies which we at the Monde Diplomatique have condemned for the last 3 decades.
Not because of its public spending.
Well, again, when all those social programs were set at the end of World War II, the country was destroyed. It is a country which was destroyed, which was partly occupied by Germany, then by the United States, which decided to embark on a very ambitious course of social programs. Why? What could be financed in the 1940s could not be financed now with the number of rich people we see all around us. I think one of the problems is largely due to the fact that rich people who used to pay their share of the collective spending don't pay their share, say there is no resources for that. But when you look at the broader picture, people who made high incomes used to be taxed in the 60%, in the 60s, in the 70s. And now it has fallen to 40%. By the way, it's also German, it's also the United States, it's also Britain, it's everywhere.
To me, the idea that public spending or social spending is bad is an ideology. It's not a fact, it's a way of seeing the world. Could you imagine China without public spending? Could you imagine the Pentagon without public spending? There would be no railways in Europe if there had not been public spending. So we live in an ideology that says that public spending is bad. But no economy, no modern economy could be developed without public spending.
But do you agree that at least since the public spending in France is 57% of the economy, that's certainly the greatest spending in Europe itself. It's still way ahead of everyone else in terms of how superior the public sector is to the private initiative, the private sector.
So what does it buy? Those 57%, what do they buy? They buy free education, they buy free health care. Of course, in countries when you have no free education, no free healthcare, public spending is lower. But then people have to take out of their own pockets to pay education, to pay healthcare.
So now then, Anne-Cécile, whose project is more powerful and more influential in Europe? The German model of austerity for the rest of Europe, or the French vision of Europe of the citizens?
We're making the German and English Europe, not the French Europe. We have.
So you lost that battle?
Oh yes, we did, but we didn't want to fight it.
It was not even waged.
No.
Why?
Because we lost we don't believe in us anymore. The French elite does not believe in the French model anymore. We want to be like the Germans, or we want to be like the English, but we don't want to be like French people. And all the things we've been doing for 20 or 30 years is just imitating other countries.
But what about, for example, your 35-hour working week, your 62 retirement?
It's not true that every time you have social model, you lose productivity. You know, I remind people very often, in the 19th century, people explain, economists, very experts, explain that you should work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Otherwise, you will not make any profit. So it's not, I mean, we are really in an ideological battle. It's not a real battle about...
But you're losing that battle.
Yes, we have lost the battle because we didn't fight it, as Anne-Cécile said.
So you're actually, so Serge, would you accept then a German leadership for Europe?
Well, I think France has accepted to be a junior partner of Germany when it comes to economic and financial issues. You have to understand that when the Berlin Wall fell, France was very much fearful that German reunification would strengthen Germany so much that Germany would lose interest in the European project.
And looking forward, the austerity being imposed by the country that with the most credit, Germany, is certainly imposing that vision that Sergio talks about to the southern tier, to the southern parts of Europe. And France is losing influence there.
There's no other vision of Europe than the Germans. And France has lost its place because it didn't fight for another model that was supposed to be the European social model. We often speak about the European social model, but nobody defends it. And you're right in mentioning the southern part of Europe, because one of the ideas in the 1990s was that France could lead a coalition of southern countries against the German and the English model.
And what happened to that?
We didn't want to be the leader. We were just felt guilty about being ourselves.
François Hollande doesn't want to see any daylight between himself and Angela Merkel.
The result of austerity is a catastrophe. It's not an abstract catastrophe. There are people dying. I mean, it's not only, I mean, we are not playing only with concept. We are playing with everyday life of millions of people.
So you can foresee the possibility of the left or the social program vision returning through the southern nations?
You can have, as you have in Spain, very huge demonstration, but you don't have, at least till now, a political forces which are able to use this mobilization to change politics. And this is one of the problems and one of the cause of the crisis. There is no alternative, like Thatcher was saying, in the sense that there is no political party, or not enough political party, who say, okay, we can change this policy. Most of the dominant political party, right-wing and left-wing, are saying the same thing.
And the result of this is that the anti-establishment forces are now mostly located to the extreme right, the far right, which is opposing globalization, which is opposing European unification, precisely pointing to the social damage provoked by those impersonal forces, which it sees, you know, as being repelled by a return to the nationalist focus.
So now then, de facto, Europe in the next few years is going to go along the vision of Merkel, of Germany, and France is going to be backseat driver.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy for Europe because it's killing the dream. In the 1950s, Europe was supposed to bring prosperity and a better future, a better economy, social progress. And now, when people hear about Europe, it's for bad news.
The question is that the problem is, or the challenge rather, is that this economic inequality, or the loss of the economic vision of the economic battle, is leading also to the loss of the political battle. And now Germany could transform its economic prowess to political leadership of Europe. Will that be acceptable to France?
You are right. I mean, it's not only that we failed, on the economic battle. We failed politically. I mean, we renounced to play an independent role in the international arena.
But maybe it's what Alain said earlier, that a change in the elite. Jacques Chirac remembered history. He remembered what de Gaulle said. He had a vision of history, of international balance of power. Nowadays, leaders, they have no vision of history. They just see things in short term. They have no ambition.
You don't think if you have a central bank and a Federal Reserve for Europe, or modeled around the Federal Reserve, where you have one economic policy where it's not decided by the Bundestag, but decided by a common European project, with a common president, with a common military, instead of having a 250,000 soldier.
But there is no European project. You can have all the presidents you want, all the institutions you want, all the procedures you want. If you have no vision, it won't be useless.
But I just want to know, is this, and we'll end with that, is this reversible? Can Europe and France get back on their feet and have a project that is different from the neoliberal project, and be able to form some kind of a third party to China and the US and the world?
I think, first of all, it is a question of political will. It's not a question of only economic pressure. I don't say economy is not important, but there should be a political will. And this is a problem. Is there a political will among the French elite? Till now, no.
So if there is no political will on the part of the French elite, and the British are totally indifferent now to the European project, that does definitely leave the Germans de facto as the political leaders of Europe.
The Germans have a will, and they have a national project. That's why they're so strong. They know where they want to go, they know what they want. We don't anymore.
You don't accept the idea that Germans are too hesitant, they don't want to lead because of their historic narrative and tradition, and they've been quite stumbling on what to do.
The Germans are colonizing Central Europe. They are placing their men everywhere in the European institutions. They want to lead, and they take every measures to do that.
And Cécile, I'm going to give you the last word. We're going now, after France, we're going to Eastern Europe, we're going to Prague. You actually think Eastern Europe has played a role that is not friendly to France's vision of Europe?
Well, the Central European countries entered the European Union under the American leadership, with an American vision.
And now they are a German backyard, is that what you said earlier?
Yes, mostly. They resent Western Europe, and they resent France for not supporting them during the Soviet domination. And they think their best friend during this period was the United States, and that the Germans suffered like they did from the Soviet domination. So they feel close to the Germans, and they resent us for that.
The Czechs, like many others in the East Bloc, emerged from communism with a burst of enthusiasm for democracy and capitalism.
I very highly appreciate common market, and I very highly appreciate what Europe did for our coming back from the shadow of communism.
But the road has not been smooth. There have been setbacks.
My political generation, in the eyes of many people, is linked to the privatization, closing their factories where they and their parents were working.
In Czech Republic, we had a big crisis of the banks in 90s, at the end of the 90s.
And scandals, losses along with the gains. Have their hopes been tarnished?
Prague is a part of Europe.
We are part of single market. I believe in single market very strongly, not only single market for goods, but also for services, which are so important for Prague.
Have they come through them more committed to capitalism than ever?
I'm believing that the Czech Republic will provide good incentives for those who are innovative, who are working hard, while it does not compensate for those who are by their will lazy.
I do agree with you that this dream is worth of preserving.
The Czechs are probably the most enthusiastic about the new ways, but they are also, in no small degree, representative of the reaction in the former Soviet countries. They think the real problems lay elsewhere.
Besides Czech Republic, let's say Germany, Denmark, and a few other Nordic countries, Netherlands, and so on, while, you know, those Mediterranean countries are absolutely different. This Mediterranean type of social system is not viable in the long term.
I think that we've got to make a jump in Europe so that in the same way that a Frenchman might say, well, I'm a Breton, but really he's a Frenchman. We have to get to a stage where we say, well, I'm British, but really I'm a European.
You mean like a second type of identity?
Like the main identity.
Like the main identity.
I mean, you've been to Beijing. Do you think the Chinese know the difference between an Englishman and a German? Not really, you know. They don't, culturally, the references are all the same for the Europeans.
Speaking of the German then, we're talking about the rise of Germany now. In the absence of central political decision-making and central authority, political authority in Europe, it's the Germans who are dictating the political policy for Europe.
Well, they're not, you know. I mean, in a way, the problem is that the Germans are not dictating. They know how to say no, but they don't seem to know how to say yes, and here's the plan. And
well, they dictated the austerity for sure, the austerity policies for the southern tier of the European.
Yes, that's true. And by keeping a very tight eye on the sort of guarantees they would give, that imposed austerity automatically.
But does this mean that we're going to see a Germanization of a European vision in the future?
No, this is the point I'm trying to make, that the Germans, because of their history, are very reluctant to set themselves up as the leaders of Europe. So you have a vacuum, not a German leadership. It leaves a hole. I don't think we can say that there is German leadership. I wish there were.
The crisis, Giles, seems to be the test of European political will, and when the test came, Europe failed the test.
Yes. I mean, it's true. A lot of what we called solidarity turned out to be fair weather friends. So now when the real test is, you've got to stick together. The fact is Europeans are fast asleep. And they don't really want to wake up to the reality. And the reality is...
decline.
Relative decline.
In part two, we travel to the center, Berlin, and to the periphery, Athens, where things get much more intense.
The whole Greek people is being penalized for mistakes.
The idea of Europe collapsing is just something that is a nightmare for the German political elite.
The biggest threat to the European Union came with the crash that began in 2008. Lehman Brothers came down like a boulder falling into a pond. It sent a wave of disaster across the Atlantic Ocean. Bankers in Europe suddenly awoke to the realization that they too were living in a bubble.
After 2010, and especially after the Italian crisis in 2011, it was a euro crisis.
Of course, none of them would accept that it was of their own creation.
I don't think that we may speak about irresponsibility. The euro seemed to work. It looked to be very profitable to invest into the Greek, Italian, and other bonds.
It was someone else's fault.
So this was typical regulatory failure.
Well, the problem is that these countries were not prepared for euro.
This Mediterranean type of social system is not viable in the long term.
Fault in the bankers' version of this tale and in most of the Anglo-Saxon media lay with the fickless Southerners and their inept, corrupt governments.
There's a tendency among the Germans to say the Greeks are lazy or they retire in the age of 55 or whatever. Yes, we are different here in Central Europe. We tend to work hard.
When there are weak institutions, there is a stronger actually tendency to misuse funds.
The rescue would have to come from, well, anyone who still had enough money to pay the banks for the bad debt they had created with their bad loans.
Germany is by far the most successful economy right now in Europe. It's doing much better than just about anybody else.
That the German politicians should have understood the full meaning of euro 10 years ago, not now. The Germans should have understood that they will have to provide fiscal transfer to the weaker.
The number one villain in the bankers' version was Greece. There is, without doubt, some truth to the tale. Becoming part of the Eurozone seemed very attractive.
Membership of the EU does mean access to a market of 500 million citizens and a common currency.
But like many exclusive clubs, there were standards of wealth that had to be met. The Greeks didn't really meet those standards.
There's now a consensus, especially in the finance ministry in Berlin and in other capitals, that these weak countries, for political reasons, Greece particularly, Spain, Portugal, they were allowed into the euro when they weren't competitive enough.
They decided to massage the accounts. They approached the best in the world to help them do it. Among others, Goldman Sachs. The club was delighted that another little country had come knocking at the door and gave them membership, even though they knew, or should have known, the truth.
Just before entering the Europe, you know what the banks told people? Come into my bank, take a loan to buy a new car, and all of a sudden, Olympic Games came. Everybody was talking about beautiful Greece, beautiful Greeks, full of prosperity, having enough money to hold the games. This was 2004.
Then came the crash. It was so severe that it appeared that Greece might go bankrupt.
The idea of Europe collapsing is just something that is a nightmare for the German political elite.
Because it was the most successful economy in Europe, and because it was rich, Germany had become the de facto leader of the European Union. At first, it seemed that simple assurances would do the trick.
There was an understanding that the safeguards in the form of stability were strong enough to preserve the consistency of Europe even in the difficult times.
Then it became apparent that all of the southern tier had been imprudent and careless.
The people, the society in Germany, in Scandinavia, in Netherlands, did not understand fully what the bottom line of euro is. That in the times of crisis, they will have to provide very strong fiscal transfer if they would like to save the common currency.
Bailouts, bailouts. Everybody needed a bailout. Else, they would fall. If they fell, the banks would fall. If the banks fell, the wealth of Germany, France, Wall Street, the rich everywhere would disappear. It was time to put up or shut up. Would Germany come through? Which really meant, what would Angela Merkel do? Angela Merkel grew up in the Soviet zone. In many ways, her rise echoes the rise of today's Germany. When the wall came down, Merkel went to the West and got involved in politics. Her rise was swift. When Germany was reunified, some people were worried.
As a citizen of a country which has a very turbulent 1,000 years of experience with Germany, I'm watching, and we should be watching.
But under Merkel, the problem was the opposite.
The Germans, because of their history, are very reluctant to set themselves up as the leaders of Europe.
The costs of reunification threatened the German economic miracle. But Germany reorganized itself, and its economy emerged from reunification stronger than ever, in much the same way that Angela Merkel, daughter of the East, emerged as the strongest leader in all of Europe. If the careless grasshoppers of the South wanted to borrow from the hard-working, cautious, saver ants of the North, they would have to cut their indulgent national lifestyles to the bone. The elites got their way. The bailouts came. Austerity was imposed. The banks were saved. Ordinary people paid the price.
The whole Greek people is being penalized for mistakes, miscarriages of justice, or whatever you put it, made by others.
And this is the big problem with austerity, isn't it? Is that by telling people to tighten their belts, they don't actually create the economic growth that they need to earn the money to repay the debts. So austerity actually drives them deeper into the debt hole.
Will it work? Was it the responsibility of Germany and the richer countries of the EU? Will the Union thrive and survive? Or is it likely to shatter, then wither away?
Here we are. The teachers are demonstrating.
We are on the 5th week of striking due to some cuts on the budget and on the people.
How deep are these cuts?
Up to 40%.
It's going to destroy one of the major pillars of society, education.
You're in your 4th year. What are you going to do after you graduate?
I don't have any future in Greece. The young people in Greece have up to 50% unemployment, and that they are the official rates. The crisis has not only financial but also psychological effects. It's like living in a place where every day you wake up and you think that you have no future, and that's something really terrible.
The most recent song we wrote, it ends up saying that the city is screaming. She's asking revenge for all the dead people we had, from policemen, from fascists. It's time for acting and doing whatever you can in order sometime, somehow, this society will be a better place.
And that's a problem in Greek society. Everyone thinks about himself. If they don't hurt me, personal, economically, socially, they don't seem to care. The political status here in Greece now, it's the baddest of the last 40 years.
You're actually saying that you need not lay back or leave or give up and so on. So there's a message of hope here.
If you ask me, of course there's a message of hope. I don't think that our generation have more problems than previous generations. I think we have our problems, they had their problems, but I know that my mother lived 20 times more poor way of life.
Are you lazy people, the Greeks?
No.
Where are you from?
Huh?
Where are you from?
Palestinian.
Are you lazy people, the Palestinians?
No.
Nobody is lazy. There are some lazy guys and some active guys. This is the base of the racism.
I'm not lazy, for sure. I know I can speak for myself. I wake up in the morning and I work like up to 12 o'clock in the night, 1 o'clock, whatever.
I believe that the problem is that we did never believe that we have a power. We didn't have faith as people in our powers, that we can do something, that we can create, that we may have I don't know, an industry or whatever.
Everyone is in crisis, so we must work together and not thinking what divides us and thinking what connects us.
We are in crisis, every one of us, but we don't know why we are in crisis. It happened in 6 months, like someone, took a needle and and punch the balloon.
We went to Berlin to ask what Germany's role ought to be. Should they do more? Were they right or wrong to demand the sort of austerity we saw in Greece?
Germany's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. If it does take on a leadership role, as it did with the euro, no doubt, it is criticised for throwing its weight around. But then if it doesn't, it's criticised by other countries, the northern countries, saying that Germany should take a leadership role because it's strong enough. So no matter which way Berlin goes, it is criticised. The nastiness of history and the nastiness of the past was easily resurrected. It's as if the peaceful architecture of the EU that was built after 1945 was completely destroyed. You have Angela Merkel, of all people, dressed in Nazi uniform and depicted dreadfully in the Greek press, the Cypriot press. This is very, very sad, that they can use history to actually divert from taking responsibility for some of their own economic problems.
Well, actually, when we were in Greece, the Greeks, youth and adults, blamed their politicians in a good part. But they have a perception that there is a German-driven austerity measures that tend to cut them down.
No, I think that perception is wrong. I think there is no such thing as Germany imposing any austerity measures. It's an IMF, International Monetary Fund, an EU program to say, look, we give you credit, Greece, if you do the right reforms.
But there's a German pressure.
There is a German pressure, but I think it's perfectly natural. Everyone needs a scapegoat, right? If you work hard for 15 years and you fall into this deep crisis, as you see in Greece, you try to find an explanation, you try to find a scapegoat. And Germany, because of its history, is a perfect scapegoat.
Is it scapegoat, or is it, Ulrika, the fact that with economic power comes political responsibility, and the creditor nation today, with 20% of the continent's GDP, is Germany?
Economic power comes with international responsibility, and this is what the Germans don't deliver, and this is also a problem. On the euro side, I think there is some German dominance in the way the euro governance is done.
Well, certainly the French are bitter about.
The problem here is that the French are also not doing reforms that they should do and they could do, so they are hiding behind Germany to blame Germany for not doing their own reform, and it's a blame game. But it's especially true in France, which is a country that sees itself in a vanquer role, winner role after World War II, and which is now sort of culturally dominated by Germany. In terms of economic dominance, things are, I think, more tricky, because on the one hand, you can make the case that France really delayed economic and structural reforms and also political modernization since at least a decade. For instance, in France, you go retirement 45 years. You are a subway driver, you go for retirement at age 50. Tell this to the Germans whose retirement age is 67, and then the German taxpayers pays for French delayed reforms. I mean, there is a problem here.
This is one of the big challenges, is exactly how do we find a common consensus in Europe. And the feeling in Germany is, look, Germany was a sick one of Europe 10, 15 years ago. We had to go through all these tough reforms. Retirement ages have been increased, wages within
When you
Germany
say tough reform from Germany, you mean what? You mean lowering the pay for labor?
But not lowering the pay, but making the labor market more flexible.
What does that mean? Lowering
making it
the pay.
Lowering
And then
partly the
part-time?
pay, making more part-time, getting people into jobs, partly through...
So the labor will suffer primarily.
I agree. I mean, we created on purpose a low-income sector. That was wanted. And we did it with the whole globalization talk. We need to be cheap, the Chinese, blah, blah, blah. So we created on purpose a low-income sector, which we have now in Germany. And by the way, we also get the problems. Because, you know, what is wrong is to look at Germany as the wealthy, sparkling country. Germany is poor. Half of Germany is poor and increasingly poor. We have poverty reports. We have 1 out of 5 children who are poor.
But there are many, many people, especially women in their 50s, early 50s, who take 7 or 8 euros an hour in order, for pride reasons, not to get welfare benefit. And they're working very hard. And there's this huge underpaid sector, which actually is, in some ways, the backbone, one of the other backbones of the German economy and its success.
The question for us really in Europe is, and I think this is what we share among all Europeans, is how can we rescue, how can we save the social component of our market economy? How can we be generous, take care of the disadvantaged? And I think to be able to do that, we needed the labor market reforms we have seen in Germany. We must not forget, yes, inequality has increased, wages are low, but we have managed to reduce unemployment from 5 million to about half of that people.
It seems that Germany now have increased its exports by 50% over the last 10 years, thanks to a lower value of the euro, which the likes of Greece and Italy seems to suffer from. So you've actually been benefiting from the suffering of others because of the value of the euro.
You can't blame German industry for being very good at exports. What we are really discussing deep down is actually the weakness of those countries who entered the euro when they weren't ready. Merkel's agenda is, in the long term, because it won't happen overnight, is to make these economies more competitive. That's her aim. It's not German hegemony. It's actually trying to say to these countries, listen, you joined the euro too early, we made a big mistake, we still want to save the euro, the only way is to become competitive.
I think we have to get away from this perception what's good for Germany is bad for the end of Europe. A competitive German economy is very good for Greece. The stability of the euro is a strength for everyone. And I think the single most important contribution Germany at the moment can make to Europe is by having a dynamic economy, strong growth, pulling in products from the rest of Europe and helping the
By the same token, whether Europe collapses or Europe makes it, Germany benefits.
Germany doesn't want weak economies. Germany wants competitive economies, and Germany is willing to still pay for these economies to become competitive, given the huge amount of guarantees that the German taxpayer has agreed to. Angela Merkel has softened, in some cases, France. For instance, she's given France a breathing space to reduce its budget deficit, because she knows that if the French economy really went down, that would have serious repercussions.
By the way, isn't that
Germany.
statement by itself quite grand when you say it gave France a breathing space?
Yes.
That's leadership, right?
Yes.
That's hegemony.
If I may, I would like to go against, because I think it's totally wrong to play this game of competing economies against each other in one single currency zone. It's the wrong concept. The real concept is that we need to talk about fiscal redistribution and the way how we organize this.
Within Germany, the perception is Germany has given a lot to Europe already, a lot in terms of credit, 83 billion only to Greece. That come from Germany, that are either in the program of the International Monetary Fund in the EU or bilateral.
Imagine Greece is 325
Can I say
billion.
something? I mean, that's a wrong perception.
But I think that the reality is in Germany, you will not find a very strong popular support to say we want to give more fiscal transfer for the rest of Europe.
Did this money go to Greece, or did it come back to Deutsche Bank straight? Because
or the French banks.
There's really a channel of money which is a closed channel.
Merkel is faced with an impossible task, and that is believing in the whole idea of European integration. She doesn't perhaps believe in political integration, but also keeping at bay the growing Euroscepticism that is even taking place in Germany.
I think Germans are among the most Europhile people within Europe. They're very much in favor of the European Union, in favor of the euro, but there is a bit of this perception among the population is the other Europeans want our money. That's the main thing they want. So there is a convincing has to be done by the German government to tell them, no, look, they are in deep trouble in the rest of Europe. We need to do our share to help them.
You have the strongest possible economy today. You have unemployment half of the European level.
That's an absolutely wrong perception. Germany's economy is not doing great. We have 0.4% growth this year. We just missed the recession in Germany. That's in the public's mind is Germany is doing great. Compared to the rest of Europe, we are doing fantastic.
Because you balance budgets?
We have surplus.
Balanced budget at the national level, whereas the regional and the local budgets are under complete strain. Go to North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the region I come from. Listen to my father, who sees the letterbox closing and the library closing and the public swimming pool closing, everything closing. I mean, the infrastructure problems and the budget on regional and local levels are insanely over.
The Germans have been very, very good Europeans. They've been told to be Europeans, they've been told to be Democrats, and they've proved both since 1945. And, they bit their tongue, and when Helmut Kohl, the former Conservative Chancellor, told them they had to give up their beloved Deutschmark, well, the Germans bit their tongue as well. OK, if it's good for Europe. And they swallowed that, and they swallowed reunification, and they swallowed all these taxes that pay for the German reunification. And they're sitting back now, and we're seeing something fundamental, I think, taking place in Germany, and indeed the other very pro-European countries, such as the Netherlands, that it's time to take stock of what we've done and where we want to go with our own national interests.
I don't think we need a full political union. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's feasible. You need banking union. I think this is the absolutely crucial step we need to take. I think we need to have more or a stronger fiscal compact?
Because the real question is, we created a currency and we created a currency without democracy, and this is the point. So either, and now we are in very unfortunately, we are in a discussion where we play more Europe, less Europe. So what we need to do is to shift the vertical discussion to a horizontal discussion, and the horizontal discussion is how do we organize European democracy, how do we organize solidarity, how do we organize fiscal transfer, how do we break through the cycle of sovereign, budgetary, national rights and the whole thing. This is the chance we have.
If you don't mind me summarizing it in my own way, but feel free to disagree. Europe needs to put Europeans, the citizens, first.
Yeah, citizens
not the
first.
appointed officials, not the influential governments, and not the corporations or the banks.
Yeah, screw the system, save the idea.
Absolutely, but that's why having a fully fledged political union is not feasible.
Why not?
Because people will tell you they don't want to have a transfer of sovereignty.
But that's the wrong discussion. We are not talking transfer of sovereignty.
We have the discussion in the UK. Let me make that point.
There's hardly any sovereignty in Greece today, or Italy, or Spain.
The sovereign today is ECB. Monti was the Draghi was the sovereign last year.
You have sovereignty within those countries on a lot of the decisions.
Yes, of course.
We have the discussion in the UK, right? Why is there the discussion, do we want to stay in the European Union or not? It's about sovereignty. It's about, look, we don't want to...
But you know, these are the British...
Yeah, but I mean, look at this discussion in the details.
We Germans want to keep also UK in the European Union.
Yes,
so we need to find a way to balance what is necessary to move ahead, to have more European integration. The strength of Europe, in my view, is its diversity. I think that's where Germany benefits from the diversity of the rest of Europe. I think we need to see that diversity as a strength. We need to foster that. At the same time, we need to have, on key aspects, more integration.
Comfort zone, it is. It's a sobering note. Marcel, Ulrich, and Judy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'll be back with a final thought. Is Europe in crisis? Most definitely. Is the Union dangerously polarized? Absolutely. Could it get better? Perhaps. Will it get worse? More likely. So what is the solution? I say democracy. Yeah, you say this is a continent that hosts 28 of the most democratic neighbors. The question is the Union democratic? Because what I see is a union that is driven by corporations and banks and led by appointed commissioners and powerful nations. What Europeans aspire to is a place where they could all call home. That's what also the world aspires to. A third way between neoliberalism and Chinese-led state capitalism. Otherwise, what's the point?